The boardroom was cold. Its glass walls stretched high above the city skyline, sunlight bouncing off polished tables and expensive suits. At the far end sat Edward Grant, a CEO whose name alone carried weight in business circles. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers tapping impatiently, as a man in a faded shirt and worn-out shoes carefully slid a resume across the table. Edward didn't even hide his smirk. "This is it?" he asked, flipping through the thin, crumpled pages. His laughter echoed in the sterile room. "You think you're fit for this company with this resume?" Across from him sat Daniel Rivera, a single father who had spent the last 5 years juggling night shifts, odd jobs, and raising his little girl. His hands were calloused, his tie secondhand, and his resume told a story of struggle rather than success. But behind his tired eyes burned a quiet resilience, a fire Edward couldn't yet see. Edward tossed the papers onto the table like they were worthless. "I don't hire janitors to run projects," he said, shaking his head. And then it happened. The glass door creaked open. In stepped a little girl, barefoot, her dress slightly torn at the hem, clutching a notebook covered with doodles. She looked no older than 7. Her big brown eyes scanned the room before locking onto her father. "Daddy, I finished the drawing you told me to," she said softly, walking toward him. The room fell silent. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Edward's smirk vanished. There was something raw and disarming about the child's presence, a reminder that this was not just a desperate man seeking a job, but a father carrying an entire world on his shoulders. Chapter 1: A Father's Burden. Daniel hadn't planned on bringing his daughter, Sophia, that day. But childcare had fallen through, and he couldn't afford to reschedule the interview. Every penny mattered. Rent was overdue, his electricity bill stacked with red warnings, and Sophia's shoes had fallen apart months ago. The night before, Daniel had stayed up until 2 a.m. rewriting his resume on an old laptop, fighting exhaustion. He didn't have degrees from prestigious schools or glowing references from CEOs. He had years of experience fixing machines, leading teams of blue-collar workers, and solving problems with grit and determination. But in the corporate world, those things rarely impressed. Still, he walked into that skyscraper with hope. Hope that someone would look beyond the paper and see the man. But Edward Grant was not someone who looked deeper. Edward leaned forward, his voice laced with disdain. "Do you know how many people with MBAs line up for positions here? And you think sweeping floors qualifies you?" Daniel clenched his jaw. He wanted to fight back, to explain that leadership isn't always taught in classrooms, that sometimes it's forged in sleepless nights and impossible choices. But before he could speak, Sophia placed her notebook on the table. Edward raised an eyebrow. "And what's this?" Sophia pushed it toward him with innocent determination. "It's my idea for making Daddy's machines better," she said. Edward chuckled, almost mocking. But when he opened the notebook, his laughter faltered. Inside were surprisingly detailed sketches, machines drawn with little adjustments, improvements that showed an understanding of flow and function. Daniel swallowed hard, embarrassed. "She likes watching me work at the factory. Sometimes she draws things I explain." For the first time, Edward looked at him differently. Chapter 3: The Test. Still, pride wouldn't let Edward yield so easily. "Fine," he said, sliding the notebook back. "I'll give you a test. 1 week. You solve a problem that even my engineers can't, and maybe, you'll earn more than janitorial pay." It wasn't kindness. It was mockery disguised as opportunity. But Daniel accepted. He had no choice. That week was brutal. Edward assigned him a broken assembly line that had been draining thousands of dollars in delays. Engineers had failed to fix it for months. Daniel spent sleepless nights at the plant, Sophia curled up in a chair nearby with her notebook and crayons. Workers looked at him with skepticism. Executives waited for him to fail. On the 4th night, when exhaustion nearly broke him, Sophia tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, what if the problem isn't the machine? What if it's the way people are using it?" Her innocent words sparked something in his mind. He rechecked the logs. She was right. The breakdowns weren't mechanical. They were human. The workers had been trained wrong. Daniel adjusted the system, retrained the staff with patience and clarity, and by the 7th day, the assembly line ran smoothly for the first time in months. Chapter 4: The Turning Point. When Edward arrived at the plant and saw the machines running, his jaw tightened. The impossible had been solved, by the man whose resume he had laughed at. Workers gathered around Daniel, clapping him on the back, praising his leadership. Sophia beamed proudly at her father. Edward called him into his office. He stared at Daniel for a long moment before saying, "I underestimated you." Daniel didn't gloat. He simply replied, "All I ever wanted was a chance." Edward not only offered him the job, he gave him a position higher than the one he'd applied for. Within months, Daniel became a vital part of the company, known for his problem-solving and dedication. But more than that, he became a symbol. A reminder to everyone in that building that greatness isn't measured by resumes or expensive suits, but by perseverance and heart. One day, as Edward watched Sophia, now wearing new shoes, run through the office halls laughing, he confessed quietly to Daniel. "You know, that day she walked into the boardroom, I realized I was wrong. Success isn't just numbers on a paper. It's the reason you fight. And you, Daniel, have a reason stronger than most." Daniel smiled, looking at his daughter. "She's my reason. Always." Closing message. The story of Daniel and Sophia spread quietly through the company. People whispered about the barefoot girl who changed a CEO's mind, about the father who proved that struggle is not weakness, but strength. And though Edward Grant would never admit it publicly, he carried that lesson for the rest of his career: never laugh at someone's resume, because you may be laughing at a story of sacrifice, resilience, and love that you could never survive yourself. In the end, Daniel didn't just earn a job. He earned respect. And he taught everyone that the truest qualifications aren't always written on paper, they're written in the scars, sacrifices, and relentless hope of the human spirit.